I got up from the table, folded my napkin, set it down beside my plate, and walked out of my own son's house without saying a single word. My daughter-in-law was still laughing when the front door closed behind me. I sat in my car for about 4 minutes, maybe 5. I didn't turn the engine on right away. I just sat there in the dark of the driveway, watching the light from the living room window, listening to nothing. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I thought they'd shake. They didn't. Then I took out my phone and made one call. I want to tell you what led to that moment because it didn't happen overnight. None of it did. The worst things rarely do. My name is not important. What matters is this. I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years building a commercial real estate business from a one-room office in Columbus, Ohio. Not inherited, not funded by anyone. Built with my own hands, my own credit, my own sleepless nights. At my peak, my company managed over 40 properties across 3 states. I employed 22 people. I knew every one of their names, and most of their kids' names, too. My wife, Joanne, passed 11 years ago. Breast cancer. She was 54. I won't spend too much time on that because I still can't talk about it the right way. What I'll say is this. She was the kind of woman who made everyone around her better just by existing. And when she left, the house got very quiet and stayed that way for a long time. We had 2 children. My daughter lives in Portland now. She's a nurse practitioner. She calls me every Sunday, sometimes twice. She got her mother's character. My son is different. He was always the charming one, the one who could walk into any room and make people feel good about themselves. I loved that about him, still do, even now, even after everything. But charm without discipline is a dangerous thing, and somewhere along the way, I've spent a long time thinking about where I let the charm be enough. I didn't push hard enough. Joanne used to say I was too easy on him. She was right, she usually was. He graduated college and spent 2 years bouncing between jobs before I brought him into the company. I gave him a real position with a real salary, not charity. I told myself that. I told him that, but looking back, I think we both knew I'd never let him fail, and that knowledge, that invisible safety net, shaped everything that came after. He met his wife at a conference in Chicago. She was a marketing consultant, polished, quick, always well-dressed. She had opinions about everything and delivered them like she'd already won the argument before it started. From the beginning, I noticed she was the kind of person who only turned the warmth on when she needed something. At first, I ignored it. New relationship, I told myself. She's nervous around me. Give it time. I gave it time. 7 years went by and things didn't improve. They got quieter in a way that was somehow worse. She stopped pretending to like me and started simply tolerating me. Family dinners became exercises in careful topic management. She'd talk over me when I started a sentence, redirect conversations to herself, make small comments that landed like little stones dropped in still water. Noticeable, then gone. But the ripple stayed. My son saw it. I know he did, and he said nothing. That was its own kind of answer. Last fall, they had a birthday party for my grandson. He turned 7. I drove up from Columbus about 2 hours, brought a gift I'd spent more time picking out than I'll admit. A model train set, the kind that actually runs on a track, because he'd mentioned trains 3 times during our last phone call, and I'd been paying attention. The house was full when I arrived. Her parents were there, her sister, her sister's husband, a couple of their friends I'd never met. My son gave me a quick hug at the door and moved on. That was fine. It was busy. I understood. What happened during dinner was not fine. We were seated around a long table in their dining room. Her mother was talking about a renovation they were doing on their lake house. The conversation was moving along. I made a comment about property values in that area. Relevant, I thought, given what I do for a living. My daughter-in-law looked at me with an expression I can only describe as deliberately patient, like I was a child who had just said something embarrassing in public. "Dad," she said. She called me Dad, which she had started doing sometime in the last year and which I had never offered and never felt right. Nobody really wants to talk about real estate right now. It's a birthday party. A few people at the table smiled politely and looked at their plates. I said nothing. I picked up my fork. My son looked at the centerpiece. That could have been the end of it. A rude moment. I've lived through rude moments. But it wasn't the end. It was more like the beginning of the real evening. The curtain going up on what she'd actually planned. After cake, after my grandson opened his gifts, he loved the train set, wanted to open the box right there, which made me happy in a way I held on to. The adults moved to the living room. Someone poured wine. Things loosened up a bit. I was telling a story about a trip Joanne and I took to Montana when we were young. My grandson had asked about Grandma. He does that sometimes, and I always try to answer honestly, gently. And I was in the middle of a sentence about a broken-down truck on a mountain road, and how Joanne had laughed instead of cried when my daughter-in-law spoke across me. He doesn't need to hear sad stories on his birthday, she said. There was a silence. I started. It's just, we want to keep the energy positive, she said, smiling the way people smile when they've decided you don't matter. You understand. My grandson was looking at me. He was 7 years old and he could feel something was wrong. Kids always can. I understood a great many things in that moment. I understood them clearly and all at once. The way you sometimes see the whole shape of something from a distance that you couldn't see when you were standing close. I said, of course, and I excused myself to use the restroom. I stood at the sink in their guest bathroom for a while. The hand towels were monogrammed. There was a candle that smelled like cedar and something else I couldn't name. I looked at myself in the mirror. I was a 63-year-old man who had built something real, who had buried his wife with dignity, who had supported his son through 6 job changes and 2 car loans and a down payment on this very house. I had given them $40,000 for that down payment, which I would discover later they had not told her parents about, and I was standing in a guest bathroom being told I was too sad for a 7-year-old's birthday party. Something settled in me. Not anger exactly. Something quieter than anger and harder than hurt. I went back to the living room. I stayed another 45 minutes. I hugged my grandson, told him I'd help him set up the train when I visited next time, and got my jacket. My son walked me to the door. Thanks for coming up, Dad, he said. Of course, I said. He started to turn back inside. Hey, I said. He paused. I looked at him for a long moment. He was 40 years old. He had his mother's eyes and his own version of something I couldn't quite name, a kind of low-grade restlessness that had never quite resolved itself. I need you to think about some things, I said. I'll call you tomorrow. I didn't call him the next day. I called my attorney. Her name is Judith Flanagan. She's been handling my business affairs for 19 years. She knows every asset I have, every structure, every arrangement. She also knows my son because he'd been on payroll for 11 of those years. I want to review everything, I told her, all of it. The properties, the trust structure, the employment arrangement, all of it. She asked me what happened. I told her. There was a pause on her end. Okay, she said, come in Thursday. Here is something most people don't know about my son's position in the company. He didn't just work for me. His compensation had been tied over the years to a series of informal arrangements that I'd set up with good intentions, but without the clarity I should have insisted on. He managed 2 of our Ohio properties, received a salary plus a share of their net income, and had been listed as a secondary beneficiary on a trust that would pass those properties to him upon my death. What he did not know was that all of that was contingent on my continued goodwill, not legally in the strict sense, but Judith had structured certain elements in ways that gave me flexibility. I had always assumed I wouldn't need to use that flexibility. I had been wrong before. I wasn't angry sitting across from Judith that Thursday. I was deliberate. There's a difference. Angry people make fast decisions and regret them. Deliberate people make careful decisions and live with them. I told her I wanted to restructure his employment arrangement into a straight market rate salary with no income sharing, effective at the next quarter. I told her I wanted to remove him from the trust and replace him with my daughter, with specific language ensuring my grandson had provisions set aside, regardless of what happened between the adults. And I told her I wanted the $40,000 documented as a formal loan with repayment terms, which we had never done because I had never thought I'd need to. Judith typed notes without comment, which is one of the things I pay her for. Then I told her there was one more thing. My son's wife had her own consulting business. Small, but she'd been pulling in reasonable income, and I knew because my son had mentioned it casually over dinner once, not understanding the implication, that two of her biggest clients were companies whose executives I knew personally, had known for years, had done business with, had recommended her to, when things between us were still good and I was still trying to find ways to make her part of the family. I didn't want to destroy her. That's important to say. I'm not a vindictive person by nature, and I don't think making someone suffer proves anything worth proving. But I wanted to remove my name, my relationships, and my goodwill from her professional life. Whatever she built from that point on would be built without my invisible support holding up the floor. I made 2 calls. Both conversations were short. I was honest. I said my relationship with my daughter-in-law had changed, and I was no longer in a position to recommend her services. Neither person pressed me for details. People who have known you for 30 years generally don't. Then I called my son. He picked up on the second ring. He sounded like he was in the car. "Hey, Dad, what's up?" I told him I had made some changes to our business arrangements, and that Judith would be sending paperwork for him to review. Silence. "What kind of changes?" I explained, briefly, clearly. The salary restructure, the trust, the loan documentation. More silence. Longer. "Dad," his voice changed. "Is this because of the birthday party?" "It's because of 11 years," I said. "The birthday party was just the night I finally paid attention." He started to say something about his wife, about how she didn't mean anything by it, about how I'd always been too sensitive when it came to her. And maybe he was right about one of those things. Maybe I had been too sensitive in the beginning, too quick to read things as slights. But the birthday party was not a sensitive reading. His wife had shut me down in front of her family, in his house, while I was talking about his mother to his son. "She doesn't want to talk to you right now," he said. "That's fine," I said. "I'm not calling her. I'm calling you." I told him I wasn't trying to punish anyone. I told him I was 63 years old, and I had earned the right to be deliberate about where I put my love, my money, and my energy. I told him the door was always open, but that I was done walking through it uninvited, and I was done pretending that the way things had been was working. He hung up. I sat with that for a while. A father sitting with a hanging up, there's a specific weight to it, not like any other kind of silence. The paperwork went out 2 weeks later. He called me 4 days after that. This time he sounded different, quieter. He asked if we could meet for lunch. Just the two of us. We met at a diner in Worthington that we used to go to when he was in high school, the kind of place that hasn't changed its menu in 30 years. I got there first and ordered coffee and waited. He sat down across from me and looked at his hands for a moment. "She lost 2 clients," he said. "I know," I said. He looked up. "Why?" "Because those clients came from my relationships. I didn't end anything. I just stopped continuing things I'd been continuing." He was quiet for a moment. "She's upset." "I imagine she is." "Dad." He pressed his palms flat on the table. "She's my wife." "I know that," I said, "and you're my son. Both of those things are true at the same time." He looked at me for a long time. I let him look. "I didn't stop her enough," he said finally, "at the party. I saw it happening and I didn't say anything." "No," I said, "you didn't." "I don't know when I stopped doing that." I stirred my coffee even though I hadn't put anything in it. Old habit. "I think," I said carefully, "that at some point it became easier to let her have the room than to hold your own place in it. I understand that, but I am your father, and your son was watching." He put his hands over his face briefly, just for a second. "I don't want to lose you," he said. "You haven't lost me," I said. "I'm sitting right here. I drove up from Columbus, same as always." The lunch took 2 hours. We talked about things we hadn't talked about in years. About his mother, about the early days of the company, about a camping trip we took when he was 12 that I hadn't thought about in a decade, but could still see so clearly it felt like yesterday. He didn't ask me to reverse the financial changes. I wouldn't have, not that day. But he didn't ask. That meant something to me. His wife called me 3 weeks later. She asked if she could speak with me. I said yes. She apologized. It wasn't the smoothest apology I've ever heard. There were qualifications in it, moments where I could feel her wanting to redirect. But she said the words, and she said them clearly enough that I believed she meant at least part of them. She said she had never dealt well with feeling like she had to compete for her husband's attention. I told her I hadn't known that was how she felt, and I meant it, and that it didn't excuse what happened at the party, but that it helped me understand it. I told her I wanted things to be different, not because I was letting anything go, but because her son was my grandson, and that boy deserved a family that could sit in the same room without someone leaving the bathroom looking like they'd made a decision. She laughed a little at that, small laugh, but real. We are not close, she and I. I don't think we ever will be. But things are different now. She doesn't talk over me anymore. She asked for my opinion about a property investment they're considering and actually listened when I answered. My son calls more often than he used to. Last month, I went up to their house on a Saturday. No birthday, no occasion. My grandson had set up the train set on the floor of the spare bedroom, and he wanted to show me how he built a tunnel out of cardboard boxes. We ran that train for 2 hours. He made train sounds even though it had a motor. His mother made lunch and brought it to us there in that room. She didn't say anything much. She just set the plates down and looked at the train going around the track, and for a moment she looked almost soft. And I thought that maybe softness had been there the whole time, just buried under things she'd never quite figured out how to carry. I don't know if my son will ever fully understand what those years cost him. Not the money I don't care about, but the ease that he let slip away, the closeness that requires maintenance, the fact that his father spent 7 years feeling like a guest in his life. What I know is this: I am 63 years old. I have buried a wife and built a company and raised 2 children, one of whom calls me every Sunday and one of whom is learning, slowly, what it means to show up for the people who love him. I am not interested in being anyone's afterthought. The drive back to Columbus that Saturday was quiet. Good quiet. The kind you earn. I turned on the radio somewhere around the outskirts of the city and drove the rest of the way home with the window down and the evening air coming in and something that felt not quite like winning, because it was never a competition, but like arriving somewhere I'd been trying to get to for a very long time. I've been thinking about what my wife Joanne used to say when our son was young. She'd say, "You can give a child everything and still give them nothing, if you never make them earn their own sense of self." I'd nod. I thought I understood. I didn't, not fully. Not until I was sitting in a diner booth in Worthington watching my 40-year-old son press his palms flat on the table and admit he'd watched it happen and said nothing. The truth about consequences is that they rarely arrive loudly. They accumulate. 7 years of small moments, a topic redirected, a sentence finished by someone else, a story about his mother interrupted at a birthday party. Those weren't isolated incidents. They were a pattern. And patterns, left unaddressed, become the shape of a relationship. I let that shape form for too long because I told myself that patience was the same as grace. It isn't. Patience without limits is just another word for avoidance. What I did after that birthday party wasn't revenge. I want to be clear about that, because I've turned it over in my mind enough times to be sure. Revenge is about making someone feel what you felt. What I did was simpler and more honest than that. I withdrew what I had been quietly providing and never been thanked for. The salary structure, the trust arrangement, the professional introductions. None of it had been demanded back. I just stopped extending it forward. There's a difference between punishment and the natural weight of choices catching up to people. My son had choices too. He chose, over and over, to let the room belong to someone else rather than hold his own ground. That's not weakness, exactly. It's a habit. And habits come from somewhere. Some of that somewhere is me. I know that. I gave him the safety net so early and kept it so invisible that he never had to develop the muscle that comes from knowing you might actually fall. That's on me. Owning that isn't easy, but it's honest. And I think honesty with yourself is the beginning of any real change. In a parent, in a son, in anyone. What I watched happen in the months after that lunch in Worthington was something I didn't expect. My son started showing up differently. Not perfectly. He's still learning, and there are still moments where I can see the old habit pulling at him. But he calls more. He listens when I talk. He let me finish a story about his mother last Thanksgiving without looking at his phone once. His wife is harder to read, but she brought lunch to a room where her son and his grandfather were running a model train on the floor, and she stood in the doorway for a moment with something soft in her face. And that was enough for now. I am 63 years old. I have buried a wife, built a company, and raised 2 children. What I know is this: character isn't what you say you believe. It's what you do when something costs you. My son is learning that. I like to think I'm still learning it too. The drive back to Columbus that Saturday, window down, radio on, I wasn't thinking about what I'd won. I was thinking about my grandson running that train around its loop and making the sound with his mouth, even though the motor was doing the work. 7 years old and already in love with the idea that things can keep going, that they can come back around to where they started and still be moving forward. I thought that was about right.